Morena and kia ora. Madam Chair, good morning. And I just want to acknowledge the huge turnout from our community at Lake Tarawera. It's great to see, so a big thank you to everyone that's made the effort to turn out this morning. So I'm Henry van der Hayden. I chair the Lake Tarawera Working Group, which is a working group pretty much focused on funding. Hey, so what do we all know as we sit here today? So Lake Tarawera, it's a tonga, it is a jewel in the crown, it is the lake of all lakes around the Lake Rotorua area. So not only does the community use the lake, but there are hundreds, if not thousands per week that actually use the lake. And this is the lake and the moonga and the mountain that gets used internationally and nationally around tourism promotion. So there's no misunderstanding from anyone here today just how important the lake and the mountain is. What is the community actually looking for at a principal level? And fundamentally, in a couple of words, what we're looking for is fairness and equity. This has never ever been acknowledged by RLC. So we don't want to be treated any differently than any other sewage schemes around other lakes. From a working group perspective, we've always been professional, constructive, and solution focused. So I'm coming here today representing the working group and the community looking for a solution. We've been told many times that Lake Tarawera is not a deemed lake. We know it's not a deemed lake, but other lakes that are getting funding like Rotorua is also not a deemed lake. So we're just looking for absolute fairness and equity. And what we are suggesting, recommending is a funding model of 50% by the community and 50% from other stakeholders. And it's not unusual, that is the norm across this district, and we've also looked at other areas across the country, and it is pretty much the norm, the 50-50. So we're not asking for anything outside the norm. So our recommendation and a solution that we're putting forward to council is 36,600. That's pretty much 50-50. And that 36,600, we want that to be capped to give our community certainty and people can start to plan their budgets, etc. And the 36,000 is GST exclusive. It's really important because a lot of the communication that comes out of council, it is actually exclusive GST, which we think is actually misleading. So I'm talking about 36,600 per household. We totally reject the existing approach at the moment, where from a community perspective it feels like an open checkbook. Costs have just gone up and up and up, and ultimately what's being communicated to us is that we need to actually pay that. Hey, so what do we know? There's been lots of communications going on between community and stakeholders. We know there is a proposal that's been put forward by Bay of Plenty Regional Council to your leadership, and it actually deals with what we're actually looking for. So we encourage you to actually engage with Bay of Plenty Regional Council and find a solution. There is wide support for the community, from the community, that I'm actually what I'm recommending here today. The community, I am going to say, is united, that ultimately, I think we will get support for what I'm suggesting, or what the working group is suggesting, which is 36,600 inclusive of GST. And you'll hear today, I'm sure, there will be some members from the community that will say they shouldn't actually be paying anything or be paying significantly less, like what's happened at some of the other lakes in the district. So I'm just going to summarise. I've got 40 seconds left. So I just really want to make it crystal clear what the expectations are from the community. We're asking council, stop kicking the can down the road and get this actually resolved. Show leadership to resolve the issue of funding with the Lake Tarawera sewage scheme. Meet with Whātane Regional Council and find a solution to some of the ideas that are being put to your leadership. Do not offset Rotakakahi costs with the Better Off Fund. Meet with us at Lake Tarawera to find a solution and agree on the terms and conditions. These are the expectations. I'm now going to leave it up to you. The ball's now in your court, and we constructively look forward to a solution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Sir Henry, for your discussion on that topic. Our next speaker will be Fred Stevens from the Lake Tarawera Sewage Scheme, on the Lake Tarawera Sewage Scheme. Morena, Mr. Stevens.
Morena. I'll get straight into it because I don't have much time. But back in 2008, the then Prime Minister Helen Clark announced deed funding to assist with the restoration of the Rotorua Lakes. Under that deed, the government committed $72.1 million, and the other 50% was to be funded by the Rotorua Council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, both which would pay 25% each, and not 50% by the ratepayers, as the previous speaker indicated. Helen Clark made it clear that a project of this scale was clearly beyond the ability of councils alone to fund, without excessive burden on their ratepayers. She added that, nor should they be expected to do so when these lakes are in our nation's tourism heartland matter to us all. It is important to note that when Helen Clark was talking about ratepayers, she was referring to the general ratepayer, not the targeted lakeside ratepayer. That should be obvious, since she said the government would pay their target of 50% to safeguard the enjoyment of the lakes by the international and domestic visitors, and therefore the regional council and the local council would be expected to pay their respective 25% share for the enjoyment of the lakes by local visitors. It was never intended by Helen Clark that the excessive burden should be targeted to the lakeside ratepayers. That brings me to the issue of the somewhat new vocabulary that has just appeared on Council's website, exacerbator and beneficiary. Council implies that the residents at Lake Tarawera are the exacerbators for the reticulation scheme, and that their septic tanks are the primary reason for the decline of water in Lake Tarawera. This is incorrect and was based on deliberately misleading science and a requirement in the Tarawera restoration plan to get the TLI for the lake down from 3.1 to 2.7. Now, interestingly enough, that was a decade ago, and the TLI now at Lake Tarawera is 2.7, and funnily enough, the septic tanks are still there. Much the same at Lake Okaraka, where the water quality has shown very little improvement following the reticulation system being installed back in 2010, with the very small improvement most likely due to extensive riparian planting. The other new terminology that has suddenly appeared in the Council's reticulation narrative is a beneficiary. The Lake Tarawera residents are not the beneficiaries of this scheme, but a lot of them may end up as beneficiaries. Given the likely cost upwards of $50,000, they could end up at $70,000 plus with the open check scenario we're working under at the moment. The real beneficiaries of reticulation is the Council itself, since they committed to the scheme without the required 75% community support, without first securing the necessary funding, and without a proper cost-benefit analysis. And they would most certainly have been facing a $340 million compensation claim from the red sticker houses at Tarawera for the 170 properties that couldn't put an advanced offset system in. And I put it to you that that's the reason why Council proceeded with this scheme without the support of the community. Tarawera, as we heard before, is a jewel in the crown of all the Rotorua lakes, and it's now been deemed to be a priority lake, so it should be eligible for at least $34 million that's still available from the deed funding. Perhaps Council might like to promote Rotorua instead with a couple of hydroslides at the Aquatic Centre. As the previous speaker indicated, he said Lake Rotomar has never been a deed-funded lake. Somehow it managed to piggyback onto the Rotoiti scheme to secure at least $10 million slice of the deed funding pie. Tarawera is now a priority lake, but seems to have been left out in the cold. Your council, through its latest long-term plan deliberations, have finally conceded that it's not just the people that live at Lake Rotowiri and Rotomar that enjoy those lakes. And in fact, all ratepayers of Roto have the opportunity to enjoy them. And we put it to you that it's therefore the responsibility of all the ratepayers in Rotorua to contribute to the reticulation schemes and to protect those lakes for their own enjoyment. Let's be clear, as the deed funding agreement most certainly is, that the lakeside ratepayers at any lake should not contribute by way of a targeted rate to their lakeside reticulation schemes, but instead all ratepayers through a general rate on the same basis as Rotomar scheme. Let's look at another historical example. Back in the 70s, septic tanks at Kawaha Point were replaced with reticulation, which was not paid for by the lakeside properties at Kawaha Point, but instead it was paid for through the general rate by all the ratepayers of the district, including the ratepayers at Lake Tarawera. And what we're asking is that it's about time we got something back from the exorbitant rates we've been paying for years and years and years. We at Lake Tarawera do not take kindly to being shafted, literally. Perhaps a better word would be thrusted, like our neighbours at Rotokakehi.
Thank you very much.
We will not
Mr.
accept to
Stevens.
sign an open cheque when clearly that was not the intention of the funding deed. Nor will we settle for the absurd amount of $36,600 per household plus GST, which some in our community are advocating.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Our next public forum is from Tracey McLeod, speaking on the Lake Tarawera Sewerage Scheme. Morning, Tracey.
Morning. Confusion reigns over the Lake Tarawera Sewerage Scheme. It's causing stress and sleep deprivation while raising questions. Why are we paying for it? How are we going to pay for it? Is there more funding? There's always been intent for funding for the Tarawera Sewerage Scheme. In 2018, a working party was assessing the optimal funding mix for the estimated 15 to 19 million required to finance the Tarawera Sewerage Scheme. In 2021, RLC had also committed funding of 36 million over the next 10 years to connect a number of rural and lakeside communities to the reticulated wastewater network. As far back as 2017, as a condition of the Ministry for Environment's Freshwater Improvement $6.5 million fund, it was subject to confirmation of $2 million co-funding from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Where is that $2 million? In the Freshwater Improvement Fund work programs submitted to the Ministry for Environment, $14.5 million was to be funded from Rotorua Lakes District Council debt from rates. In the first 2019 funding table, RLC long-term process confirmed external funding of the scheme. However, in the second table in 2021, it was changed to RLC funding policy will confirm external debt funding of the scheme. Why did the funding model change? According to the Rotorua Lakes Council funding policy, RLC borrows the required local share and funds the sewerage projects. Then the lakeside ratepayers' contributions offset the borrowings. But the Council's funding policy doesn't align with what was in the terms of the funding deed for all the other previous lakeside sewerage schemes, and it needs to be investigated. For years now, we've been informed that RLC is aware of the cost burden such projects create for their ratepayers and continues to explore a range of options to further alleviate the cost burden for Lake Tarawera ratepayers. We'd all like to know, what are those options? In the Rotorua Tiarawa Lake Strategy Group 2018 annual report, it stated further funding will need to be secured to enable the scheme to go ahead, and the Tarawera Sewerage Steering Committee is currently pursuing this. So why did the Rotorua Lakes Council move into a public excluded session on the 25th of August 2022 when it entered into a contract for the construction of Stage 1 for the Tarawera Sewerage Scheme without securing the funding first? From a released MFE official information request in 2021, it was highlighted that if the $6.5 million is repurposed from Lake Tarawera towards the completion of the Rotoriti scheme, two things could occur. Either the Tarawera scheme is stopped and or OSET systems are put in place, or continue with the completion of the scheme. And either RDC takes on additional debt, which apparently is not feasible given the balance sheet, or the Tarawera Ratepayers contribution would need to increase from $33,000 to $50,000. But note, if the advanced on-site wastewater system option was installed, any lake under the interventions on the funding deed would have been fully funded. The verbal update from the Minister for Environment on these options was also in a public excluded session in the meeting on the 22nd of October 2021. Questions remain unanswered from the councils. What was the verbal response from the Minister on those options? Has the $6.5 million freshwater subsidy been repurposed from Lake Tarawera to Lake Ratepayers? Recently, in a council workshop meeting on the 5th of February 2025, the council called the Lake Tarawera ratepayers exasperators and direct beneficiaries of the Lake Tarawera Sewerage Scheme, but the iconic lakes attract domestic visitors and international visitors from which the whole community benefits. These two exasperator and costing slides have since been deleted from that presentation. Lake Tarawera ratepayers have paid high rates without receiving any infrastructure, while $180 million was spent on luxury projects throughout the Chadwick years, instead of focusing on the basic core services. Rotorua Lakes Council have not provided cost-benefit information to demonstrate that the reticulation option is indeed the best use of ratepayers' funds. Bird life, land use, forestry, farming practices, small animals, geothermal activity, and even 7 lakes with worse water quality feed into Lake Tarawera, contributing to over 99% of the nutrient load. Will a $31 million sewage reticulation scheme have any effect on the less than 1% nutrients from septic tanks? Any benefit may not even be measurable. The Lake Tarawera ratepayers question the manner in which the council resolved to undertake the sewage reticulation and whether the views of the ratepayers on the sewage options were adequately sought. More funding needs to be sourced and secured now. A fixed cost must be put on the sewage scheme, otherwise the Tarawera Lake ratepayers may be left with no other option than to commence legal action with a judicial review.
Thank you. Can I now call upon Mike Allen from the Lake Tarawera Ratepayers Association. Good morning, Mike.
Marina, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, councillors, for listening, and thank you, Lakes Executive, for listening as well. I'm Chairman of the Lake Tarawera Ratepayers Association. I was appointed Chairman by the community in January when the community replaced in full its previous committee. There are 4 things I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about what is Council getting out of this project. Under current Council proposals, what do ratepayers get? What are the options to fund it and get a more balanced outcome? And what do I think can be possible next steps? The Council, in summary, is getting out of this program the following things. It's getting a solution, as Fred mentioned, for 170 houses that have been consented and do not and cannot meet acceptable wastewater standards moving forward. Do not underestimate the risk management advantage for this council in having that solution provided. That solution is currently being paid for by the community. You get reticulation of various high polluting council sites along Spencer Road, and we all know what they are. You get capacity to charge joining fees, which I'm told are $800, but maybe $1,000 a year. You get capacity to charge joining fees for roughly 100 houses that have yet to be built out. You get an unknown spare capacity for the trunk line, thought to be up to capacity of up to 1,000 houses. We've asked for clarity on this from your executive, and we haven't yet received it. And you get a system that can be booked as a council asset worth $30 million and ability to raise debt against that. We would encourage you to ask your executive to size those benefits, because unless you do, I don't know how you can make a suitable judgment about how much money to allocate. Secondly, under current council proposals, what do ratepayers get? We get the lowest subsidised facility in the region and potentially in New Zealand. We get a bill of $50,000 and rising with no end in sight. I think that would be either the highest or the second highest per site wastewater solution for residents in the country. We get a hardship structure that is well below what has been offered at Ratepayers. Thirdly for you, what are the options to fund it and get a more balanced outcome? I've written to Andrew outlining 4 mechanisms to fund the gap. I haven't heard back. You could undertake a financing arrangement with EBOP, that has been mentioned this morning. EBOP remain open to conversations. EBOP may even have other solutions to think about, and I would encourage you as councillors to show some leadership and get in touch. Secondly, you could add to your borrowing. The number is about 3.75 million. You have a borrowing capacity of up to an asset to borrow against of 30 million as a result of this project. The LGA funding structure, as mentioned earlier, a local government funding structure, which I've mentioned to Andrew. The local government funding agency is making funds available at far higher than normal council ratios. I suggest you investigate that. This would be easily fundable if you took opportunity for that structure. And finally, a targeted rate calculated to be $11 per ratepayer in the Rotorua region. Noting that Tarawera residents are paying a $40 targeted rate for the shortfalls on Rotoiti. I'm talking about balance here. What are the next steps? We would encourage councillors to tidy and strengthen the disclosure regime between its executive and councillors. You are not getting the real picture about community feelings for this program. We don't think you're well informed. You've heard a lot this morning about errors of fact that have been put in front of you. The program in its current form is not supported. Don't misunderstand me, it is not supported. Get on and work with EBOP and find a solution. A number of you have said to me, Mike, you go and talk to EBOP about a solution. I am doing so. It is not my job. You are the leaders on this issue and you should get on and negotiate. They are keen to help. Look at the financing options you have and ask yourselves whether you want this grief to continue for the next 18 months, because it will. We are quite resolved. Furthermore, if you don't resolve this soon, the consequences will be deep and long-lasting. Outcomes like the one you propose live on in the public arena, and they tend to stick to individuals involved, and they tend to stick to councils. Look at Kaipara District Council. I haven't got time to finish. I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.